Thank you for joining us and speaking to us. Brothers and sisters, please welcome His Eminence, the Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Donald Wuerl.
Thank you. Thank you. And Richard, it is truly a joy to be here and to be sharing a platform with you. I think, as you mentioned, we both come from Western Pennsylvania, and I don't think the parents of either of us would ever envision that we would be on this platform together. But it is truly, truly a joy. I also want to recognize John Sweeney. Now, if you were wearing a Roman collar, it would say President Emeritus. But we all recognize the many, many years of service that you have provided. I also want to recognize some of my brother bishops who are here. Archbishop Supich has already been recognized, but it's good to have you here, Archbishop, as a part of this entire program. To other brother bishops, and I see with us Bishop Bransfield from Wheeling. I see Bishop Dennis Madden, at least I did, there he is, Bishop Dennis Madden from Baltimore, Bishop McElroy from San Diego, and if I've missed any, oh, I see Bishop Dorsonville, newly named auxiliary bishop for the Archdiocese, and I see Bishop Roja. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Did I miss? Oh, Bishop George, where is? He's here. There he is. Bishop Murray, good to see you from Youngstown. To all of you, but I also want to say a word of gratitude to Dr. Steve Schneck. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this and helping to see this come to be. I've been asked to speak about the Catholic idea of solidarity, and so I greet all of you as brothers and sisters as we carry out this effort to underline and live solidarity. Solidarity in our contemporary world, and the need for a reawakening of the vision of life, of social justice, of social development, of economic development that is rooted in faith. More recently, we speak of such a renewal of appreciation of this long-standing teaching on social justice as an articulation of an aspect of what we call the new evangelization, the reawakening of the understanding of those basic principles that were part of the foundation of the American experience, and particularly the American experience in organized labor. In short, we're going to talk about how we understand our shared human condition, our interrelatedness, our obligations to one another. All of this we call today solidarity. And then we're going to take a look at how we're supposed to share that vision. And we call that the new evangelization. In the not too distant past, the word solidarity often referred primarily in the imagination of people to the courageous Polish labor movement by that name, which played a decisive role in bringing freedom to Poland and thus throughout Eastern Europe. Today, though, we hear the word solidarity being used in a much broader context, in a context that touches all of us, but specifically in Catholic social teaching. It's taken on a meaning, a very precise meaning. St. John Paul II introduced this word into our social justice vocabulary as an expression of respect for human unity in practice. Solidarity is essentially the virtue of living out something that's far more foundational, the fact that we are all part of the human family. This word has thus become a part of the Catholic vocabulary, but the meaning, the foundation, is much, much more ancient. after Mass, not too long ago, as I was standing in the back of church, and this we do all the time, priests do this all the time, stand in the back of church and greet people as they come out. And I was standing there greeting people, and this youngster came up, and I usually judge the age of youngsters by about their size. So he looked to me like he was 4, maybe 5, and his parents were behind him, and he said to me, "How come you call us brothers? You're not my brother." And I said, "Well, there's a sense in which we are all brothers and sisters because we're all part of God's family." He looked at me, then he turned and looked at his mom and dad. And when they shook their head yes, he turned and he said to me, "Wow, I didn't know that." And then he offered that youthful approval. "That's cool." I said, "It really is. It really is. It's also true. It's also true." Catholic social teaching is based on our recognition in faith that all of us belong to one human family. Each of us, seen through the lens of faith, is a child of God, our Heavenly Father. We therefore have an obligation to care about and for one another. The virtue of solidarity is this unity put into practice. As a Christian virtue, the core and sustenance of solidarity is charity, and thus solidarity is necessarily committed to the common good. That means the good of every member of the Commonwealth, of the community. Solidarity is expressed in works of generosity, forgiveness, reconciliation, communion. Catholic teaching explicitly recognizes organized labor as one expression, one of the instruments of solidarity in the effort to bring about this awareness of human communion, this awareness of our obligations to one another. But we can't take solidarity for granted. It is sometimes avoided or even denied. Our president cited what Pope Francis said about these words. Richard, you pointed out that the Pope said, solidarity is too often forgotten or silenced. It even sounds like a dirty word. But it's our word for what we are trying to accomplish. And I'd like to make an appeal, the Pope said, to those in possession of greater resources, to public authorities, and to all people of goodwill who are working for social justice. Never tire of working for a more just world, marked by greater solidarity. We who share this vision need better to appreciate it and then to bring it to our contemporary culture. That's part of the theme of today. Speaking about helping us all to better understand solidarity, and then being willing to share that concept, to take it out into the public forum and try to live it. As Blessed Paul VI explained in his exhortation calling for a more renewed period of evangelization, he said, it's only in the Christian message that modern man finds the energy for his commitment to human solidarity. And I think that is a reflection that grows out of our history. Anyone aware, as everyone in this room is, of the history of the American labor movement recognizes that solidarity between church and worker, that solidarity between faith and the vision of solidarity that is the foundation for the whole labor movement. As we explore the Catholic ideal of solidarity in our contemporary world, I would like briefly today to touch on the following points. 1, contemporary society and the culture as the context of the new evangelization and why we need it. 2, the foundation of Catholic social teaching. 3, the role of social teaching and social justice in that teaching. And 4, the characteristics of the Catholic vision of authentic solidarity. Recent popes have spoken about certain social and cultural challenges. And that's the first point I would like to address today, the context, and why we need these conferences, and why we need to focus on something as self-evident as human solidarity. Because the context in which we live, the modern cultural context in which we live, challenges that understanding. Popes have spoken about 4 elements that weaken the concept of solidarity. The first is relativism. This is the position that would deny the existence of an objective truth, a natural moral order, a reference point, something as basic as the call in human nature to recognize we're brothers and sisters. Relativism simply steps aside from that and says basically what is what we say is. The second is a secularism which treats religion as a solely private matter, something you should really keep to yourself and not have an impact on the way you see one another. And our whole history and tradition, not just for the labor movement, but for our nation, has been the recognition that it is from God that we have received our human nature, our life, and therefore our rights. They're not given to us by someone else. The third element is a materialism that today tends to call attention to the individual at the cost of the common good. There's a sense in which the more we accumulate things, somehow the better off we are, and that doesn't have to take place in relation to everyone else. And the fourth is an individualism that can center on the self and lose sight of the dependence on others, our interdependence, and our responsibilities to one another. There also persists in our culture various ideologies, mentalities, which view all of societal life through the lens of economic class, ethnic, racial, or sexual identity, ideology, or political party preference. And here, in either or any or all of these, we see a tendency to divide people into groups that are combative one with the other. We can all have a variety of preferences, and we can all have a variety of articulations of those preferences, but that doesn't mean that your preference and my preference necessarily divides us in the search for a common good, in the need to embrace one another in the march of humanity towards a much, much fuller understanding of who we are. Pope Francis, with his very clear words and his very inviting way, offers a powerful counterpoint to those forces that I just mentioned. He speaks in opposition to what he calls a globalization of indifference. The indifference is directed to one another, that somehow there's just the individual at the center of the universe. We all know that one of the benefits of growing up in a family, especially if you have brothers, as I did, you learn very, very quickly that you really are not the center. And the points of gravity are all around you. And that's what the Holy Father is saying. This globalization of indifference is something we need to be alert to. And also a throwaway culture that simply sees as expendable anything and everything, because what counts is what is important to me right now. It's a culture, and this is not revelatory. All of us experience this. We live in this. This is a part of the world in which we live. A culture, the Pope says, that always leaves people out of the equation. the unborn, young people, the elderly, the sick, those who are deemed to be of no use. This was from his radio address in Rio de Janeiro. And he continues, he warns us, some people want their interpersonal relationships provided by sophisticated equipment, by screens and systems, which can be turned on and off, and thus eliminating all of those noisome neighbors from our lives. And yet, those neighbors are a part of our life. He goes on to say, the gospel tells us constantly to run the risk of a face-to-face encounter with others, with their physical presence, which challenges us, with their pain and their pleas, with their joys, all of which infect us. It's very difficult to continue to have a theoretical animosity against someone you have just had a cup of coffee with. Theoretical animosities can continue to exist if you're just communicating with a screen, with digital, which you can turn off, never having met that person. I think one of the great, this is an aside, but I think one of the great possibilities for world peace today is the increasing ability of people to have communications and friends across national lines that begin digitally but end up in something far more constructive. What brings fresh urgency to this mission that we're speaking about today of reigniting, reproclaiming, having our culture reappropriate this sense of solidarity is just how widespread and profound are the forces which neglect these basic understandings. Even something as simple as the basic understanding of right and wrong, of the common good, of the dignity of the human person, and of our obligations to one another in genuine human solidarity. People in this room can point out how these factors have even contributed to a decrease in union membership in recent years. And part of the effort, and this is one of the things that I want to cite from our president, from Richard Trumka, one of the things he said, which in a way parallels something that our Holy Father has said for a wider audience, and that is, we can't continue to look inward. Unions, if they're going to flourish, can't continue just to look inward, but have to be engaging, reaching out. Our Holy Father says today, the Church, in her efforts, cannot be closed in on herself, but must go out. He uses that trilogy: go out, engage, and accompany. And all three of them are important, and all three of them have to be taken together. To go out. If we stay closed in on ourselves, whether it's a union or any other institution or the church, we don't begin to accomplish our goal. Engaging others is the first step in that process. Engaging others. But we don't engage others simply to stand facing them to say what we think they should do. We engage others so that we might accompany them on the journey in which all of us in that journey, hopefully, are drawing closer to God and closer to a realized human solidarity. The need for this solidarity is, despite contemporary cultural currents, deep down people implicitly, instinctively, atavistically know there's a natural need for solidarity, even if they don't consciously articulate it. We realize that no person is an island. You just can't stand in the midst of life alone and truly, truly experience the joy of living. But we also know that it's not by bread alone that we live. And that brings us to the whole idea of faith helping to inform human solidarity. A number of years ago, I was invited to speak at the Catholic Center at Harvard. And the theme of the talk was the role of faith in a pluralistic society. And so I gave my presentation, and as soon as I sat down and the moderator said we would welcome any questions, a hand went up, and the moderator turned to me and said, he teaches in the law school and is a professed atheist. And I said, well, his hand's up. So he stood up, and his question was, what do you people think you bring to our society? Now, the you people was a reference not just to me, but to the whole first row. This was an interfaith gathering. Now, I was there in my finery, but so were they, and all identifiable. So the you people was the we people. What do you people think you bring? Now, since he was a lawyer, and I've always been told that a good lawyer never asks a question, the answer to which he doesn't already know, I said, would you mind if I answered you with a question? And he smiled and said, no, go ahead. And I said, what do you think our culture would be like if we had not heard the religious imperatives of all of those people seated there, all of us people? What do you think it would be like if we had never heard voices in our community saying, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness? What would our culture be like if we had not heard the religious imperative, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you would have them do to you? What would it be like if we had never grown up hearing, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers? What would it be like if we had never been reminded by all of these traditions that someday we're going to have to render an account of our life? To his credit, he said, Father, it would be a mess. The various virtues and principles that I asked that professor about, the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes, the other teachings of Christ, the manifestation of that teaching in the human experience of the magisterium, are all expressions of a call to solidarity, for unity, to overcome divisions and self-interest, to care for the poor, the weak, to look for the common good. They all remind us that we have an obligation to others. Without this solidarity, this world really will be a mess. But even without an explicit call to solidarity, the reality of interdependence and the need to work together is really understood deep down by everyone. Everything we do, everything we have materially, is dependent upon the assistance of others. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, the houses we live in. That's all the result of people coming together, people we don't even know, and doing what it takes. A whole legion of people working to make that happen. For Christians, what is different about our understanding of solidarity is that Jesus challenges us to go out beyond what the world means by solidarity and work out of a social order in this world to bring about that reflection of justice, compassion, understanding, kindness, truth, peace, that is the beginning for us of the kingdom of God. It's not just an effort to get people to work together. It's a religious vision that says this is something far grander, far greater, and it's rooted in your ultimate destiny. The principles of Catholic social teaching are deeply rooted in an understanding of the human person. The technical term is anthropology, and a friend of mine warned me about using that word because people will think you're talking about some sort of an archaeological dig. The term, the technical term, which is really just an expression of humanity, of what it means to be human, is our recognition of who we are as human beings. And this necessarily recognizes failure. And this is a hard, hard concept for our culture to accept today, that it is possible to be wrong. It's possible to make a mistake. It's possible to use the words of faith to sin, because that requires then an admission that I didn't get it right and that I need perhaps to change course and maybe even to ask for some forgiveness. What we're speaking about in this Christian vision is human beings capable of enormously wonderful things. It's at the very heart of humanity to be created in the image and likeness of God with all of that potential, and then to recognize we don't always get it right, but we also have the power of the Spirit working to help right what was wrong. That vision is the human being fully alive in grace. This tradition of teaching revolves around the following themes: the dignity of the human person, the value of human work, the understanding of the communal nature of human life, and thus the rights and responsibilities that are a reflection of human solidarity, a priority, concern, even love for the poor and those vulnerable. That vision grows out of the understanding this is who we are. Moreover, as God created us, man and woman, we're meant to be transforming agents of society. We are not bystanders. We're supposed to be active agents in the transformation of this society. Work is an integral part of the human experience, and workers have an innate human dignity and the rights that accompany it. Work and associations of workers, then, are important because they allow not only for us to do more and have more, but to be more fully a human who recognizes the interdependence, the connectedness, and our relationship to God. Concern for the poor, the downtrodden, the weak, the alienated, the marginalized, all of this is essential to the gospel vision of life and what God expects of those who place their faith in God. In Matthew's gospel, we hear the extraordinary story of the Last Judgment, when the measure of our faith is going to be how we treated the least of these. I think that's one of the most powerful and demanding chapters in the gospel. Christ returning in glory to separate those who cared for others. When was I hungry or thirsty or in prison or naked? And the answer we give to that is going to determine what happens to us. I've always thought it was with great wisdom that the church, in the conclave to elect a pope, in place of a mural like this, there's the great Michelangelo Last Judgment. And we're all sitting there looking at that. And you go up with your ballot closed. And you stand in front of that and you say, before Christ, who will come to judge. What the gospel says to us is we should have that vision in mind all the time when we're looking at those around us in need. They're sisters and brothers of the same family. Pope Francis puts it this way: no one can remain insensitive to the inequities that persist in our world. Everyone according to his or her particular opportunities and responsibilities, should be able to make a personal commitment to putting an end to so many social injustices. And this is why the church is so involved in countless works of mercy, of charity, of teaching, of social justice, of social service. This is why we feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, educate the young, care for the sick, welcome the immigrant. We're trying to be that salt and light that Jesus says his followers have to be. That language in the New Testament is not optional. We're not told, think about this, and if you think it's a good idea, you might want to associate yourself with it. These are words put in the imperative. Such a view of society where all are called to do their part in realizing a truly good and just society is part of the fabric of America. That's why that message, that gospel message, rings so true here, and why we're so comfortable with the message that grows out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It grows out of that tradition precisely because the two are parallel. Our heritage as a nation was fostered by the words of that tradition. We have, from the beginning, recognized at so many levels of our society all the intermediary bodies that depend on individuals. Community organizations, faith families, fraternal societies, unions, churches, all of which bring their gifts and vision and energies to making a better world. But the collectivity, the common good, grows out of all of them being actively engaged in the work of bringing about a truly good and just society. That's what distinguishes us. From the very beginning of our nation, that's what distinguished us. And commentators going back several hundred years ago remarked on that. When Americans find they have a problem, they turn one to another and say, how do we resolve this? And out of that has come all kinds of wondrous responses. Just as there are countless stars in the sky that form all types of constellations, so too there are many, many organizations, institutions, intermediary bodies that make up our society. And the church continues to be one of those constellations in the world of the many lights shining on our efforts to be a people capable of experiencing many traditions and yet working together and out of that to form a common good. Our very motto, E pluribus unum, speaks of that vision, that aspiration, that reality. But who are these lights? Who are these lights that shine in our culture and society today? All of those intermediary organizations we spoke about are made up of ordinary people. Ordinary people who are doing the work of the kingdom in the places where they find themselves. Their parents speaking loving words to their children who give a positive example to their peers, their attorneys defending the rights of others, their craftsmen and contractors who earn an honest living as Jesus did, building and fixing homes for a better life, their doctors, nurses sharing the healing ministry of Christ, their laborers in factories, mills, and manufacturing operations all over this land, and seeing Bishop Bransfield here, miners and people who are working in very, very difficult situations, as Richard can well attest to. Their teachers, educators, their computer and information technology experts, engineers, soldiers, police officers, their civil servants, farmers, and fishermen, as were so many of the followers of Jesus. Each is a star in a greater constellation, and together we create a world of light, vision, and hope. As I mentioned, the word solidarity has often been identified with workers' rights, to come together, to organize, to speak collectively against injustices. At the same time, to further enhance the dignity of human work and the worker. It's no accident that an anthem of the labor movement is Solidarity Forever. As a part of this effort, as with the civil rights movement, labor has encouraged and depended upon support, solidarity, appreciation, recognition from the greater community. I grew up, as I noted at the beginning of these reflections, in that part of southwestern Pennsylvania where the labor movement was quite active. One visible way that solidarity was manifested both within the movement and in the larger society was respect for the picket line. Years and years ago, I was on my way from the Chancery office to a convenience store. I needed to get some toothpaste. But I was thinking as I was walking along about this letter I was supposed to be compiling, composing, and writing. And I wasn't really watching where I was going. And all of a sudden, I heard a voice say, "Father, please." And I looked up, and I was about to walk into a picket line. Now, if you grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, and you encountered a picket line, I froze and simply stepped back. And the voice said, "Thank you, Father. We learned that you don't cross a picket line." The efforts to stand together today on behalf of all human development, to be inclusive in our outreach to all people, to demonstrate our commitment to protect the environment and our respect for all human life, immigrants who are coming into our country as well, are the new picket lines of today that we are all asked to respect. A new picket line that says, "Don't cross this line." When I first learned what a picket line was, I asked my grandfather as a little kid, "What is that?" And he said, "You never cross a picket line. It's all we have. It's all we have." The new picket lines have to be the respect for all of those people who are struggling today to become a part of this culture, to become a part of this world, to become a part of what we hold up as the American way of life. And protection of them, defense of them, engagement of them, inviting them into all of this are the new picket lines. Today, as we hear of the approaching publication of Pope Francis's encyclical, we recognize, and I want to begin by saying I haven't seen it. We recognize again how much we're interconnected and interdependent. But we're always trying to read the signs of the times. And isn't that what the church is asking us to do today? Read the signs of the times. We're so used to doing that, going all the way back to Rerum Novarum and Leo XIII, and through a whole succession. And think of the succession of blessed teachers we have had in our lifetime. St. John the 23rd, Mater et Magister, Pacem in Terris, of Paul VI, of John Paul II, of Benedict, and now of Francis. We have to recognize the great sign of the times today is the need for renewed solidarity. As we begin to conclude these remarks, I just want to touch on the characteristics of the Catholic vision of authentic solidarity. St. John Paul II, in his encyclical on human work, Laborem Exercens, explains that labor unions are indeed a mouthpiece for the struggle for social justice. But he says this struggle should be seen as a normal endeavor for the common good and not a struggle against others. I think that is characteristic of the new evangelization towards a renewal of solidarity. It is not against anyone that we work. It is for the inclusion of everyone who bring their gifts, their vision. The balance is to see that the freedom and the rights of none of us are abridged in order to welcome everyone into the process. And that's the great challenge. It's been the challenge of our country from the beginning, and it's certainly something that we need to be alert to today. But our struggle is not against The struggle is always for. St. John Paul II gives voice to two essentials in his teaching on authentic solidarity: the common good, or communion, and this community of people. In the Apostolic Letter Sollicitudo Rei Socialis, he expressly states that solidarity is a firm and persevering determination to commit ourselves to the common good, that is to say, to the good of all and of each individual, because all are responsible for all. Pope Francis reminds us that the culture of selfishness and individualism often prevails in our society. And he says it is not what builds up society. It's not what leads to a more habitable world. Rather, it's the culture of solidarity that does so. A culture of solidarity means seeing others, and this is the important part of his statement, not as rivals, as statistics, but as brothers and sisters. Just as the youngster said, wow, that's cool. We are brothers and sisters. I would like to conclude these remarks with one image of why an event like today, a reflection on our roots, an understanding of our tradition, a grasp and articulation of where we come from and what is the scriptural and traditional heritage of our nation is so important. A number of years ago, I received a very, very beautiful floral piece. It was large, it had all kind of green leafy things, and it had these flowers in it. And I said to the housekeeper, "This is really very beautiful. We should take very good care of it." She said, "You leave it alone, it has a good chance." But each day, as I would come into the living room, here was this magnificent floral display. But the flowers were beginning to wither. And I felt the soil, and it was moist, and there was plenty of sunlight in the room. But each day, the flowers got worse and worse. At a certain point, I pulled out one of the flowers, and I found that the ingenious florist had taken the flowers and put them into little plastic containers with a little bit of water in them. Some of you are shaking your head. You've received one of these plants. The flower was not connected to the plant nor to the life-giving soil. And when the little bit of water it had ran out, it withered. Our experience of life has to be rooted in the rich soil of our history, our faith, our tradition, all those convictions that have made us a great people. Our social teaching, our history of experience is deeply rooted in the rich soil of our faith and illuminated by the great light of God's Word. As we stay connected to our roots and wisdom, we know we will continue to flourish and to bring those blessings to others. We simply need constantly to look outward, to engage, and to accompany. And as God was with those who went before us, so God will be with us. Thank you.